Sometimes it feels like the guy upstairs just doesn't care. The bad guys win and life's mountains feel unclimbable. In this episode of Old School, we'll show you how to live with confidence even when it feels like God isn't paying attention.
Oreos. Any other Oreos fans? All of the different varieties of Oreos. I've always been an Oreos fan. I really loved Oreos when I was a kid. I loved them so much that one fateful evening, I decided to sneak an Oreo before dinner because I knew where they were in the pantry, and Mom was in the other room doing laundry or some mom thing, I don't know. But she wasn't around. So I snuck a couple Oreos, one for myself and one for my probably 4-year-old little brother. And I thought for a moment, man, I just unlocked this amazing new ability because Mom has no idea. Oreos anytime I want, as long as she's in the other room. This is going to be great. And Mom came into the room just a few minutes later to make sure that dinner was progressing properly and getting ready. And she looked at me and she said, "Did you get a cookie?" And of course, 5 or 6-year-old me panicked in the moment. I'm like, "No." And she kind of smiled and she looked at me again and did the whole mom, like you cock your head a little bit. And she's like, "Are you sure that you didn't just now eat a cookie?" I said, No. And of course, 5, 6-year-old me had no idea that there was still like cookie crumbs in the creases of my mouth. And in every crevice of every tooth in my mouth was the black evidence of Oreo cookies. And no, I didn't eat it. She said, okay. Now, curiously, later on that evening, we had dinner, but we did not have dessert after dinner because Mom knew. I didn't realize at that age, but I came to understand gradually over the years, even when you think Mom doesn't know, Mom knows. Any moms in the house can amen that? Mom knows. Mom somehow knows that stuff. Mom knows if you really brushed your teeth or if you just kind of swished your toothbrush in the sink a little bit. Mom knows. Mom knows if you brushed your hair under the hat or if you didn't. Who cares? The hat's on. Mom cares, and Mom knows. Mom knows when you say, "Oh, school was fine." She knows if school was actually fine or if school was not fine, but you just don't want to talk to her about it right now. Mom knows this stuff. Moms have an amazing awareness, and you would be a fool to underestimate Mom's awareness. In the same way, we realize up here that if God is who He says He is, that God knows everything. God sees everything, that He's fully aware. And yet, you're probably like me. So many times in my life, I realize that I'm living as though God was somehow unaware of the stuff that I'm doing in the day-to-day. Or that maybe He just doesn't care about what's happening day-to-day. And today, I want to sort of recenter us around something we know to be true up here. It just doesn't always play out in our lives. God's complete and total awareness of what we're doing on this planet. I want to look at it because if you understand that fresh, I think it should make you sweat a little. And it should fill you with confidence if you're in a challenging season. So let's look at it together. I want to show you a lady in the Bible who had a really powerful resetting of God's awareness in her life. Her name was Hagar, and she lived way back in the Old Testament. We've been in a series called Old School, where we're looking at truths from way before Jesus arrived on the planet because we learn about God's character and we learn about human nature in it. So we're going to pull this up. We have a lot that we're going to be reading today. Most of it will be up on the screens, except for one that I forgot to give to our awesome team. But you can find everything on the Bible app. So if you haven't pulled that up yet, now's a great time. Go to the Bible app, look for events, and we're right there. But let's look at it together. Genesis chapter 16, starting in verse 1. The Bible records this. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had not been able to bear children for him, but she had an Egyptian servant named Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, "Go and sleep with my servant. Perhaps I can have children through her." Wow, what a great idea, right? What could possibly go wrong with that arrangement? I'm old, I can't bear children anymore. Here's this young lady who's my servant who ties my shoes and helps me put my clothes. Why don't you just have sex with her, and if she gets pregnant, I'll just take her kid and call it mine. What could possibly go wrong there? Verse 4. So Abram had sexual relations with Hagar, and she became pregnant. But when Hagar knew she was pregnant, she began to treat her mistress, Sarai, with contempt. Wow. Precisely everybody saw that coming. Right? You're going to boss me around? I'm sorry. I thought I was the one who was carrying the child for Abram, not you. And things begin to get really contentious in the home. So she starts treating her mistress with contempt. Well, Sarai is still the master. So verse 6, Sarai treated Hagar so harshly that she finally ran away. The angel of the Lord found Hagar beside a spring of water in the wilderness. Okay, so imagine, young lady, pregnant. We don't know how pregnant she was, but enough time had passed. Okay, so she's here. She doesn't know where she's going. She's just trying to run away. The angel of the Lord shows up, verse 9, and said to her, "Return to your mistress and submit to her authority, and I will give you more descendants than you can count. You are now pregnant and will give birth to a son," and this is important, so you need to zoom in right here. "You are to name him Ishmael," which means God hears, "for the Lord has heard your cry of distress." Now, many of you guys are familiar with the story, but maybe you're not. So God promised Abraham he would have a son, and eventually God planned to bring Jesus, the Savior of the world, through that genealogy. But that promised son was Isaac. Abraham also had a son named Ishmael. And if you've watched the news, the descendants of Isaac and the descendants of Ishmael are still not friends even today. There's always been a rivalry here. But God heard a mother's cry when she was in the wilderness and didn't know what to do and didn't know where to go. And he said, "I want you to name your son God hears." Maybe you didn't realize that, but the name Ishmael means God hears. So she has this moment, she realizes this, and write this down in your notes. You need to understand, just like she did, that God hears your prayers. They're not bouncing off the ceiling. Even if nothing's happening right away, God hears. Here's what else. So verse 13. Thereafter, so after this experience, Hagar used another name to refer to the Lord who had spoken to her. And she said, "You are the God who sees me." You are the God who sees me. The word there in Hebrew is El Roi. Okay, so some of you guys, you're watching the Jetsons, all this, you didn't know El Roi was in the Bible. And it means God sees. That was the Jetsons kid, right, El Roi? Okay, it's been a while since I saw that. Other people refer to him as El, right? God. That was the word, just the generic word, God. She didn't call him the same thing. She said, "I had an encounter with God. And when I was desperate, God heard me. My son is named God Hears. And when I speak to him or about him, I don't say El, I say El Roi. He's the one who sees." So write that down. God hears what's going on. God sees what's happening in your life. And I want you to imagine this lady, what an experience that she had. Okay, I've served God pretty much my whole life. I'm a pastor's kid. I grew up in church. I have never once had an encounter where God himself shows up on the planet in physical form and talks to me face to face. That's pretty cool. I'm pretty sure if I had that, I would be convinced that God hears and God sees. So convinced that I might actually just always call him God who sees. An amazing experience she had. But that one experience, Well, let me show you. All right. So let's fast forward. She has this amazing experience. She gives birth to a son. Abraham loves his son, but eventually God fulfills his promise to Sarah, and she has a baby named Isaac. Okay? About 15 years later, we're not sure exactly, right around there, we see this, Genesis 21. When Isaac grew up and was about to be weaned, Abraham prepared a huge feast to celebrate the occasion, kind of like our 100-year celebration featuring dat brisket. If you like barbecue, okay, you want to be there. Okay, he prepares a big birthday party for his son, but Sarah saw Ishmael making fun of her son, Isaac. So she turned to Abraham and demanded, "Get rid of that slave woman and her son. I don't want her sharing the inheritance with my boy." And after arguing about it a little bit, verse 14, he sent her away with their son, and Hagar wandered aimlessly in the wilderness of Beersheba. Just imagine this, okay? Imagine the horrible deja vu that Hagar is having. I got sent away. Last time I ran off into the wilderness. Here I am again in the same wilderness I was before, and God showed up before, but now here I am again. Why am I going through this again? And I'm sure she's calling out to God just like she did before. She's taking her son, whose name is God Hears, and they're together saying, "God, help. We're here in the wilderness. We got nothing to do." Okay, bandits might come and overtake me. Wild animals. I have no money. I have no flocks or no herds. I have no grain. I have nothing. I have a little bottle of water in a animal skin. And she's desperate. Verse 15, when the water was gone, she put the boy in the shade of a bush. Then she went and sat down by herself about 100 yards away. "I don't want to watch the boy die," she said, as she burst into tears. Can you imagine the desperation? It's one thing to know you're going to die. It's another thing to know that your child is going to die right in front of you and you can't do anything to stop it. I cannot imagine a more desperate moment for a mother than Hagar feels. And she falls into despair, even though of all people on the planet, she knows God sees and God hears. God sees is the thing she calls. Every time she prays, "I pray to you, God sees. I'm asking you to save my son, God hears." Okay, and if you're Hagar, just reason with me. In that moment, there are only two conclusions, okay? Because nothing's happening and you're about to die. Conclusion number one is, I was wrong about God. I guess he doesn't see or he doesn't hear. But she knew her experience. There's one other conclusion. The other conclusion you could draw is that God hears and God sees, but he just doesn't care. You think of the same thing I am. If God sees and God hears, but he doesn't reach in to save me, he must not care. I guess he doesn't care if I die. And she's in this deep moment of despair. And it's there that something amazing happens, and I want you to see this. I'm so glad for verse 17. Genesis 21:17. But God heard. God heard the boy crying. And the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven. "Hagar, what's wrong? Don't be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Go to him and comfort him, for I will make a great nation from his descendants." Then God opened Hagar's eyes, and she saw a well full of water. She quickly filled her water container and gave the boy a drink. And the thing you need to understand about God, write this down in your notes, is that even when it feels like he's not listening, even when it feels like nothing's happening, even when it feels like you're at the very end of your rope, when it feels like he's in the other room doing God stuff like laundry and he's not paying attention, God cares. He cares about you. He cares about what you do, and he cares about what is done to you. God cares. All right? And God doesn't just care for Hagar, okay? Psalm 34:15 says this, "The eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are attentive to their cry. That means not just people in the Bible, but anyone who is righteous, okay? The moment that I say, God, forgive me of my sins, come and be in my life, God's righteousness is imparted to me. And God is keenly aware of what's going on in my life. God cares about what's happening, the good and the bad. But sometimes it feels like he doesn't. And I want you to grasp this. If Hagar had that powerful a moment where she talks to God face to face, now it's not God in the fullness of his glory. He appears like a man. But she has a moment where she hears with her own ears, hey, I have a promise for you. I have a destiny for you. Your son is going to be very important, and I care about you. If that woman can have this head knowledge and life says something different, and she's like, I guess not, then any of us who know better can so easily start to live like, well, I guess he doesn't care. He doesn't seem to mind. He doesn't seem to notice. And I want to recenter us around this idea. God hears, God sees, and God cares. He actually does. And if that is true, then there are a few things that we need to know. There are a few ways that we need to respond to that truth today. I'm going to give you two of those. All right, so the first one is this. This is important. So write this down or fill it in on the Bible app. If God hears and sees and cares, then integrity matters. Integrity really matters if he's actually paying attention. I think we understand, but just so integrity is this idea that I am the same whether someone is watching or not. I'm the same whether it's officially going to affect me this way or not. I am the same when I'm talking to these people and that guy over there. I'm the same. And it's so weird. We as Christians, we know up here, God hears, God sees, God cares, but then we live like, well, as long as my boss doesn't see, it's okay. No one's going to raise their hand, but some of you know what I'm talking about. As long as my boss doesn't see, I'm just going to come in a little late. I'm just going to clock out a little early. I'm just going to have an extra business lunch. I'm just going to kind of round up the numbers so they look good. As long as my boss doesn't see, it's okay. As long as my husband doesn't see what I've actually spent the money on, it's okay. As long as he doesn't know, I'm working. I put the money in the account. As long as mom doesn't see my browser history, it's okay. As long as the IRS doesn't see the money that I made selling stuff online and I chose not to report, it's okay. As long as the FBI doesn't see all of the software that I found for free on a BitTorrent and I didn't pay for it because those rich guys, the CEOs have enough money anyway. As long as they don't see, it's okay. And we have this weird, logical disconnect. Because if God is God and God sees, then even if my boss doesn't see, God sees. Even if my wife doesn't see, God sees. Even if I never get in trouble for something, I actually don't get away with anything because God sees everything. Hebrews 4:12 and 13 says this, everything is naked and exposed before his eyes, and he is the one to whom we are accountable. Now, I love grace. I love the fact that God does not let me into heaven or not based on how good of a person I am. It's based on how good of a person Jesus is. I love that I can have a relationship with God even though I'm still a flawed human who's trying my best and who makes mistakes. But that is not the same as saying, we'll just live whatever. It doesn't matter. It does. It does matter. Okay, write this down. God is keeping track of every decision that you make. Every one. Which is kind of a terrifying thought if he's actually paying attention, because we have plenty of these things where it's not that big of a deal. I don't think God really cares. I've done this for years and nothing ever seems to happen. It's okay. It's not okay. All right, let me explain it to you this way. Imagine that tomorrow you read on Facebook or you read in the newspaper, you saw on the news, the city of Pekin is going to try a brand new, never tried before, brand new strategy. For one solid week, there will not be any squad cars clocking any speeds all across town. Nobody's paying attention, right? Just be honest, okay? This is okay. Just be honest. How many of you guys, I'm driving a little bit faster if I know nobody is clocking? That's me, okay? It's wide open space, right? 14th Street, right? And if it's late at night, I'm just going through there at 80 miles an hour. I'm in control of the car. I know I'm safe. I'm paying attention to everyone. It'll be fine. Imagine for a week, you drove the speed you actually want to drive all through town. And then at the end of the week, okay, imagine that you come back at the end of the week and you realize there were the 3 little dots, see more, under that article on Facebook. You go, whoops. And you click see more and it says, the city of Pekin is not going to have any squad cars clocking because they're trying a brand new technology where they're tracking with GPS and satellite imaging. Oh no. All right. Steve is a retired police officer. Steve, if I drove 95 miles an hour in a 45 all week long and they had records of it, would I be in trouble? I would be in jail, right? Straight to jail, right? Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Okay? Big trouble. Big trouble. Okay, listen. God sees everything. Nothing escapes his attention. And we have to give an account for how we live. And even if it's not now, he's tracking every single thing that we do. It matters whether somebody sees it or not. It matters whether there's instant justice or not. It matters. Jesus said this, Matthew 12:36. He said, I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will give account for every careless word they speak. There are some times, I don't know what idiot first said, cheaters never prosper. I've seen a lot of cheaters who seem to prosper a lot. Anybody else? All right? I've seen crooks who are rich. I've seen liars who get elected. I've seen a lot of people cheat and get ahead. For now. But if God's tracking everything, no one gets away with anything. So it really matters. It really matters how you live. You need to be careful and don't mistake God's patience and forbearance for permission. It does matter. What you look at when no one else is watching, it does matter. Those things that you think that you would never act on because you're committed to marriage, but the stuff that you think about that guy at work who gives you that matters. And that imaginary conversation where you really tell someone what you think about them, but you would never actually say it, even the thoughts in your mind, they matter. Now, I want to turn this around too. It's not just about getting in trouble with God. God is also looking at your life and wanting to bless you for doing what's right. And sometimes that blessing is delayed. But Jesus also said this, Matthew 6:4. He said, your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you when you do things right. So whether it's wrong or right, eventually the things that you do will come home to roost. Write this down. Whether now or later, every choice has consequences. Integrity matters. God hears, God sees, and God cares. Now, let me give you one other takeaway, and this is different, but I think some people in the room also need this. Okay? If it's true that God hears your prayers, God sees what's going on, and God cares, then whatever challenge you're facing today, write this down, you are up for the challenge. Because you didn't fall off into a pit somewhere and God's looking around saying, man, I can't find Greg. I can't find Greg anywhere. Does anyone know where Greg is? I think he might be in trouble, but I don't know, man. He fell off the radar. Right? It doesn't happen. If God is aware and you're going through a difficult time, you should be encouraged because it means you are up for the challenge. Now, I want to be careful when I say that because there's a pet peeve that I have as a pastor. I can't stand this. It makes me want to throw something at the wall when I hear this. How many, the actual hand raise, okay? Because you've probably never said this, but somebody around you has said this, okay? I want to do a poll. How many have ever heard someone say, God will never let you go through more than you can bear? Anybody ever heard that? Where in the world did we get that idea? Can we put that up on the screen? We need a Dwight Schrute, right? Truth check. False. Okay? The Bible does say God won't let you be tempted beyond what you can bear, but he will provide an escape. Even then, it's really not you who can fix anything. The truth is, God will give you way more than you can handle. On a regular basis, write that down in your notes. God will give you way more than you can handle. And when those moments come, even if you know better, it's easy to respond like Hagar and say, I don't know what happened. I thought he was here. I guess I'm just going to sit here and die. Listen to what Paul says to the church, Romans chapter 8. God inspires him to write these words as Mark comes back up. He says, does it mean that God no longer loves us if we have trouble or calamity or are persecuted or hungry or destitute or in danger or threatened with death? No. We're here a long way off, so of course, that's not what it means. The reason that he wrote that is because that's how people felt. I thought when I signed up for this thing, when I signed up to be a Christian, I thought he was going to keep me from this stuff. Here I am wallowing away, and he doesn't seem to care anymore. But I want you to reason with me. If he sees, if he hears, if he cares, then whatever it is that you're facing, it's not because it's the end of your story. It reminds me of a time when my family went on Christmas vacation when I was a kid. We lived in Texas, and my brother and I, we had a whole little society of hermit crabs. You thought you had weird pets. I had hermit crabs. You get the slightly bigger shell, and then they crawl out of their old shell into the bigger shell. And you'd feed them. They'd get the water from a sponge. Okay, we had this really thing of hermit crabs. And we went to visit our family in Kentucky. And so we didn't want to leave the hermit crabs at home. We wanted to make sure they were fed. So we brought this whole terrarium with hermit crabs in it and put it in the car. We drove them from Texas up to Kentucky. I learned a valuable lesson at 11 years old about hermit crabs. Hermit crabs were not up for the challenge of winter in the Midwest. They do really great in Texas. I tragically learned that hermit crabs cannot survive even in the car for a few minutes when we went in to get Burger King. They were not up for the challenge. And I could imagine Kirby the crab as he's slowly freezing to death thinking, Master has forgotten us. Right? And he's dying and he's like, where are you, Master? Okay? And I didn't know. Okay? If I knew that they weren't up for the challenge, I would never have allowed them to stay in the car. But God knows. God knows where you are. God knows what you're facing. He is keenly aware. And you are not up for the challenge because it's not too big. It is too big for you. The mountain is too big to climb. The wave crashing over your head is enough to drown you. But write this down. You are up for it because he is with you. And when you're staring up at the wave that's about to drown you, it does not feel like God sees or God hears or God cares. And again and again and again, you are going to encounter times where the head knowledge you have about God and your experience in life don't match. And again and again and again, this idea is going to come to you. I guess he doesn't care. I guess he doesn't care. I guess it's not that big of a deal if I just tell people, I have something I need to be at a family activity because I don't want to help somebody move. It's not that big, but he doesn't care. if I'm facing this thing, and every time I want to get out of the house, anxiety rises up so much, and I haven't been to church in 6 weeks because I just get so anxious when I think about being in a room full of people, and he doesn't seem to care. I guess this is just my personal cross to bear until I die. That thought's going to come up again and again and again. And let me tell you, if that thought entered the mind of someone who had a face-to-face with God, you better believe it'll enter the mind of you. Last thing to write down is this, and it seems funny, okay? But I thought, what is something that people can relate to? How many of you, all right? God doesn't care, this idea, that is the ring in your toilet. Anybody ever get irritated living in the Midwest, and every time, no matter how many times I clean that stupid porcelain bowl, here I come again, and it's starting to get the little, okay? Because we have so many minerals in the water here. Mineral Springs Park, they're not joking, okay? I want you to understand this. No, I like to use a clean toilet bowl too. Okay, we're talking about toilets at church. I can't believe it. No matter how many times you scrub it and it's sparkling clean, it gets dirty again and again and again. And you could say, well, Peggy, I guess we just stop trying. We just let it go. I'll just pee in a dirty bowl. No, you're like, no matter how many times it gets dirty, that's why the brush is right there. And every time I see it, I get the brush out and I put the stuff and I say, I'm going to clean this up again and again and again. You need to understand. In this life, there will be times when God's help is delayed. There will be times when God's reward is delayed, when God's discipline is delayed. And every time that happens, this little intrusive thought will bubble up to the surface, and you won't even think about it in these terms, but this idea, I guess he doesn't care. And you've got to scrub it again and again and again. You've got to come back to the center again and again, because God does see, and God does hear, and God does care. And integrity in the little things really matters. You may not get a raise if you work hard when nobody's watching. Your wife may not be more amorous towards you if you're not looking at things or thinking about other people. Your parents may not give you an extra allowance if you actually do the stuff and you study and you turned in the report that you said you did. God is watching. And let me tell you, there is no reward on this planet that can compare to a clear conscience. When you lay down and sleep at night and you say, I may not have the most, I may not have done the best, but I can be at peace knowing I did what God expected of me. And the smile of heaven upon you is a powerful thing. Sometimes you don't know it until you have the lack of it. And some of you know what it's like to live through a season where you know you're doing wrong, and you know that, and there is no peace. Whatever challenge you're up against, God is with you. Even if that challenge is to be honest and not fabricate stories, it matters, it matters, it matters. So don't let life lie to you and tell you God doesn't care. You got to scrub that thought every time it comes with the truth. God is the God who hears. He's the God who sees. And He's the God who cares and rewards those who live for Him and diligently seek Him. Hey there, just wanted to take a minute to say thanks for watching. If a friend sent you this link, it's because they believe what we talked about today is going to make a positive impact in your life. And if it did, there's probably somebody that you care about who could benefit from it. So take a minute to share this video with somebody. Post it to your timeline or send them a direct link. And if you're able, take a minute to give using the link at the bottom of the description on this video. One last thing. Maybe you feel a tug at your soul and you're ready to take the next step in your spiritual life and form a relationship with God. We've got folks here who would love to talk with you about it. So just text prayer to the number on your screen and we'll follow up with you. It's also in the description on this video in case that helps. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.